A wild card walked into Berlin this week and beat a Wimbledon champion, a Queen's Club champion, and a top 8 seed, all inside the same 5 days. Then she lost one match short of the final, and somehow that loss might be the best thing that has happened to her career this season. This is technically a story about a loss, but by the time you finish watching it, you'll understand why it is actually the bigger win. Picture the flash cuts as we open. Her stunned face after the Rybakina match point, the warm handshake with Svitolina at the net, the last ball flying past her racket against Noskova. 3 different reactions, 3 different opponents, and one single week that changed how the entire tour talks about her heading into the bigger tournament still ahead. Here is what most casual fans do not understand about a wildcard entry. It is essentially a courtesy invite handed to a player the tournament wants in the draw for star power or storyline, not because the rankings demanded it. Nobody scouts a wild card seriously. Nobody builds a tactical plan around her, and nobody expects her to survive the first round, let alone make a run deep into the second week. That expectation gap is exactly what makes this story work, because the player walking with nothing to lose is also the player nobody bothered preparing for. Her name is Alex Eala, and a week ago, almost nobody outside hardcore tennis circles could have placed her, which tells you something about how fast reputations move once results start piling up. To understand why this week mattered so much, you need a little background first. Eala is the player who first turned heads back at the 2025 Miami Open, where she arrived as a wild card with almost nothing to lose. She walked out having beaten 2 top 10 opponents back-to-back, Madison Keys and Iga Swiatek, becoming the first Filipina ever to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal. That run also made her the first player from the Philippines to crack the world's top 100, a genuine milestone for a country with almost no tour history behind her. She backed that breakthrough up by reaching her first career tour final at Eastbourne later that year, then capped the season by winning her first WTA 125 title in Guadalajara that September. So she arrived in Berlin not as a complete unknown, but as someone whose ceiling people already suspected, even if nobody had proof it was real yet. What makes her dangerous on grass specifically is the same thing that makes her dangerous everywhere. An aggressive, flat-hitting return game built to steal time away from servers, paired with a willingness to go for lines under pressure rather than play it safe and hope. She trains out of the Rafael Nadal Academy in Spain, a detail that gets mentioned constantly in commentary booths because it explains so much of her fight on big points and her refusal to fold once a match turns physical. She arrived in Berlin ranked 35th in the world, carrying real momentum, but also real recent disappointment close behind it. Just 2 weeks earlier, she had won her second career WTA 125 title in Birmingham, beating her own doubles partner in a brutal 3-set final that stretched past 2.5 hours. That one made her the first top seed to claim that event in over a year. From there, she went straight to Queen's Club, the tour's marquee grass warm-up, eager to keep the momentum rolling on home turf for the swing. She crashed out in the second round to her close friend Iva Jovic instead, a result that quietly reset expectations back down to 0. So when she landed in Berlin, on a wild card days later, the storyline writers had already moved on. Nobody was watching. That is exactly why nobody saw what was coming next. Her first real test was Donna Vekic, the reigning Queen's Club champion fresh off beating Britain's own Emma Raducanu in that final just days earlier. She was also a genuine grass court veteran with a Wimbledon semifinal already on her resume, the kind of opponent built for exactly this kind of grass court test. Vekic was supposed to be the gentle gatekeeper, the experienced name who quietly ends wild card runs in round 1 without much drama or headlining spilled. Instead, Eala took it 7-5, 6-4, grinding through a tense opening set she nearly lost before finding her rhythm and pulling away comfortably in the second. It was not a blowout, and it barely made headlines outside the stadium grounds. But it was the first quiet signal that something different was happening this particular week. Almost nobody noticed yet, and that anonymity was about to become her sharpest weapon heading straight into the next round. Then came Elena Rybakina, the world number 2, the reigning Australian Open champion, a former Wimbledon winner, and statistically one of the most fearsome servers anywhere on the entire tour. Rybakina came out swinging, firing 3 aces in the opening game alone, and racing out to a 4-1 lead before Eala had even settled into match or found a rhythm on return. This was supposed to be the moment the fairy tale ended. The predictable wall a wild card eventually runs into against a player of his caliber and experience. Instead, Eala clawed her way back into the set and broke serve twice in a row to seize control. She closed it out 7-5 before sealing the second set 6-4 in just under an hour and a half on a packed outer court. Afterward, still catching her breath in the on-court interview, she admitted she was still shaking and revealed the first thing she did was call her father straight from the locker room. That win marked her 5th career victory over a top 10 opponent and even her head-to-head with Rybakina at 1 apiece, avenging a loss to her on clay just weeks earlier in Rome. This was the moment phones genuinely came out across group chats, because beating the reigning Australian Open champion on grass is not a fluke anyone can quietly explain away. 2 days later, Alina Svitolina stood across the net, a battle-hardened veteran and a mother on tour. She had a well-earned reputation for being the player who specifically ends young breakout runs before they go too far. The two had actually crossed paths once before in doubles, teaming up on opposite sides at a January exhibition event. This was their first true singles meeting, and it carried real weight. If Rybakina was a shock, Svitolina was supposed to be the proof, the kind of opponent who exposes nerves and inexperience if either is hiding beneath the surface of a hot week. Eala raced out to an early lead and never let Svitolina dictate terms. Closed it out 6-3, 6-4 in just under 90 minutes to book her spot in the semifinals. That result made it back-to-back top 10 wins and her 6th career victory over a top 10 ranked player, a feat she had not managed since beating Keys and Swiatek at the 2025 Miami Open. The image that spread fastest afterward was Eala covering her face in disbelief at match point, hands visibly shaking. She could barely process what she had just done on the biggest stage of her career so far. By now the conversation around her had shifted entirely. She was no longer the feel-good underdog story. She was a legitimate threat that every remaining player in the draw had to take seriously and prepare for properly. The semifinal against Linda Noskova carried weight before a single ball was struck, because this was not a fresh matchup between two strangers meeting for the first time. Noskova had already beaten Eala earlier this season at Indian Wells in brutal fashion. 6-2, 6-0, a scoreline that lingers psychologically even months later no matter how much form has changed since. There was an ironic twist buried in their history too. Eala had actually beaten Noskova once before, back in 2020 at the French Open Girls Tournament. That win came as juniors and meant little heading into a rain-delayed professional semifinal on grass nearly 6 years later. The match itself was pushed back by rain before a single point was played. Once it finally began, it swung early, with Noskova racing out to a 5-2 lead in the opening set before closing out 6-2. Noskova had not dropped a single set all week heading into this match, and her serve was once again the deciding weapon, dictating terms from the very first game onward. Eala answered in the second set, falling behind 1-3 before winning 3 consecutive games to lead 4-3, the single moment in the entire match where the upset felt genuinely possible again. Noskova responded immediately, reeling off 3 straight games of her own, breaking at love on the final point to close the match 6-4 and seal her place in her first ever grass court final. The numbers told their own story. Noskova finished with 9 aces and won well over 80% of her first serve points. Eala managed only 2 aces and struggled to find a foothold on return for most of the match. Afterward, Noskova credited the rain delay and dropping temperatures for forcing her to adjust her game plan mid-match, a small detail that humanizes the win rather than turning her into a faceless villain in this story. The real headline buried in the scoreline is this. Those 6 games were the most anyone had taken off Noskova all week. Eala broke her serve twice in the tournament, where almost nobody else managed it once, turning what looked one-sided on paper into the most competitive set Noskova faced in Berlin. Noskova now moves on to face Jessica Pegula in the final, after the American upset the tournament's top seed earlier that same day. Eala's own week ends 1 match short of that stage. Step back from the scoreline for a second, because the number that matters here is not the final result. It is the fact that belief is the hardest currency to manufacture in elite sport, A single trophy can never fully prove a player belongs at that level against the very best week after winning Birmingham. Eala herself said that lifting a trophy does not mean she is among the greats yet, that she still has work to do to prove it consistently against the players who matter most. Berlin is that proof. Beating a Wimbledon champion, a Queen's Club champion, and a top 10 veteran inside one single week is not a fluke that can be explained away by a soft draw, a tired opponent, or a lucky bounce here and there. She climbed from 35th in the world to 30th, sitting just one spot below her career-high ranking. She also picked up roughly $66,000 in prize money along the way, a tangible marker, but genuinely the smallest part of this story. Remember, too, that she remains one of the very few Filipino players, man or woman, to ever crack the world's top 50, in a country with almost no tour history to build on or lean on for support. Every milestone she reaches effectively writes a new page for Philippine tennis. Since there is no established blueprint or predecessor, she can simply follow into these tournaments. She is building the path as she goes, match by match, country by country, week after week. The wild card label, the courtesy invite nobody takes seriously, is effectively dead now after a week like this one. No future opponent, no future draw committee can afford to overlook her again heading into a Grand Slam. There is no time built in to dwell on any of this, because Eala heads straight into the Bad Homburg Open, opening against Elise Mertens within days of Berlin final even being played out. Zoom out further, and this run sits inside a genuinely strong stretch of grass court tennis, a Birmingham title, and a Berlin semifinal arriving just weeks before Wimbledon itself begins on the very same surface. A result like this one also strengthens her case for a protected seating at the All-England Club. That is a kind of small structural detail that can determine whether she avoids a top 5 name in the first round or walks straight into one immediately, with Wimbledon's main draw beginning in just over 2 weeks. Seeding at a Grand Slam is decided off live rankings in the days before the draw. That means every ranking point she banked in Berlin could end up shifting her entire path through the tournament before a single ball is even struck on center court. Every opponent left on her side of any future draw now has to scout her properly, study her patterns, and respect her as a genuine threat rather than a name they can comfortably overlook in round 1. She walked into Berlin a wild card nobody bothered preparing for. She is walking into Wimbledon a problem every seed in the draw now has to find a way to solve, and an entire country back home will be watching every single round of it. If you want the Wimbledon coverage as it happens, this is a channel to stick around for. Drop a comment below on whether you think she goes even deeper at the next major.